Hello everyone, and welcome to another EDH gameplay video brought to you by Affinity for Commander. My name's Martin.
And my name is Alex.
Today we have a bit of an unusual game, featuring 2 Reanimator decks, a self-mill deck, and a 4-colour Pillow Fort deck. But just before we begin, we would like to thank everybody who has congratulated us on our engagement. We've been together now for just over 4 years and look forward to spending many more together. With that soppy stuff out of the way, let's see those opening hands. My commander is Sidisi, Brood Tyrant. I keep an opening hand containing Diagraph Captain, Vulturous Zombie, Deadeye Navigator, Parallel Lives, Evolving Wilds, Llanowar Wastes, and Temple of Deceit.
My commander is Muldrotha the Gravetide. My opening hand consists of Baleful Strix, Satyr Wayfinder, Song of Thrasios, Terramorphic Expanse, Verdant Catacombs, Memorial to Genius, and a Swamp.
Dylan's partner commanders are Ravos Soul Tender and Thrasios Triton Hero. He keeps an opening hand of Daxos the Returned, Mark of Eviction, Nevermore, Evolving Wilds, Jungle Hollow, Sunstep Citadel, and a Swamp.
And finally, Tristan is playing Meren of Clan Nel Toth. His opening hand contains Harvester of Souls, Awakening Zone, Grave Pact, Golgari Charm, Golgari Rot Farm, and Vivid Grove.
Dylan wins the die roll and starts things off by playing Sunstep Citadel. He then passes to Tristan.
For his turn, Tristan plays Vivid Grove. He then passes the turn.
I play Temple of Deceit, move the top card of my library to the bottom and end my turn.
In my turn, I play Terramorphic Expanse. I sacrifice it to put a forest into play tapped and pass to Dylan.
Dylan plays Evolving Wilds, sacrificing it to put an island onto the battlefield tapped. He then ends his turn.
Tristan plays Golgari Rot Farm, returning Vivid Grove to his hand. He then ends his turn.
I play an Evolving Wilds of my own and use it to fetch an island, putting it into play tapped. I then pass to Alex.
I begin my turn by playing a Swamp, and then cast Satyr Wayfinder. I reveal Desert of the Indomitable, Simic Signet, Birthing Pod, and Tectonic Edge, putting the latter into my hand and the rest into my graveyard for later use. I then pass the turn.
For his turn, Dylan plays a Plains. He then casts Nevermore, rolling a die to decide whose commander to select. Meren is randomly selected and Dylan ends his turn.
Tristan plays Vivid Grove and then passes to Martin.
I play a Swamp and then cast Diagraph Captain. I then end my turn.
In my turn, I play Verdant Catacombs. I sacrifice it, paying 1 life to put Sunken Hollow onto the battlefield. Next, I cast Baleful Strix and draw a card from its Enter the Battlefield trigger. I then pass the turn.
Dylan starts his turn by playing Jungle Hollow, gaining a life. He then casts Karmic Justice, to which Tristan responds by casting Golgari Charm, destroying Nevermore. He then moves to his turn.
Tristan plays a forest and then casts Awakening Zone, before passing to Martin.
I start my turn by playing Llanowar Wastes, paying 1 life to tap it for a green mana. I then cast my commander, Sidisi Brood Tyrant, milling 3 cards as the result of her Enter the Battlefield trigger. I don't mill any creatures, so don't make any zombies. Grrr. Moving to combat, I roll a die to decide who to attack, and Tristan is once again chosen as the victim of Lady Luck. He then takes 2 damage from my captain, and I end my turn.
For my turn, I cast Song of Thrasios. I then cast Reclamation Sage, destroying Awakening Zone. Tristan tries to persuade me to instead choose Karmic Justice, but I cannot be swayed. I play Memorial to Genius as my land for turn, and then pass to Dylan.
Dylan plays a Swamp and then casts a Baleful Strix of his own. He draws a card and then passes the turn.
In his turn, Tristan plays a forest. He then casts his commander, Meren of Clan Nel Toth. With no creatures in his graveyard to return to his hand, Tristan ends his turn.
I play a Swamp, lose another life to Llanowar Wastes, and cast Parallel Lives. Now all I need is some tokens. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with Sidisi and mill 3 cards. I once again mill 0 creatures, which is rather concerning for a deck that's over 50% creatures. Alex chooses not to block and takes the 3 damage. I then pass the turn.
I start my turn by putting a lore counter on Song of Thrasios. I then cast my commander, Muldrotha the Gravetide, and replay my Verdant Catacombs using her ability. I sacrifice the land, losing a life to put a forest into play, and then cast Simic Signet from my graveyard. With nothing more to do, I pass to Dylan.
In his turn, Dylan casts Mark of Eviction, targeting Muldrotha. He then casts Daxos, the Returned, followed by Elephant Grass. Where does Dylan find all of these bizarre cards? He gains an experience counter and then ends his turn.
Tristan starts his turn by playing Forest and then casts Harvester of Souls. He then passes to Martin.
I play a Swamp, because apparently my deck doesn't contain any forests, and then cast Deadeye Navigator. I Soul Bond it to Sidisi, and then pass to Alex.
I begin my turn by putting a third lore counter on Song of Freylis, putting a +1/+1 counter on each of my creatures. Next, I replay Verdant Catacombs for the third time and move to combat with my vigilant, tramply, indestructible creatures. I attack Tristan with Baleful Strix and Martin with Reclamation Sage and Satyr Wayfinder. Martin calls my bluff and blocks the Sage with his Navigator and the Wayfinder with Sidisi. Lacking any combat tricks, Martin takes no damage and Tristan takes 2. In my post-combat main phase, I pay 2 life to cast Birthing Pod from my graveyard. I then pay 2 more life to sacrifice Baleful Strix to the pod, putting Fleshbag Marauder into play. Tristan draws a card from Harvester of Souls and everybody chooses a creature to sacrifice. Dylan sacrifices Baleful Strix, Tristan sacrifices the Harvester, Martin sacrifices Sidisi, and I sacrifice the Marauder. Tristan draws 3 cards from the Harvester, and I sacrifice Verdant Catacombs, losing a life to put a Swamp onto the battlefield. I then recast Fleshbag Marauder using Muldrotha, forcing everyone to sacrifice another creature. This time Dylan sacrifices Daxos, Tristan sacrifices Meren, Martin sacrifices Diagraph Captain, and I once again sacrifice the Marauder. I then end my turn.
In Dylan's upkeep, Muldrotha is put into Alex's hand and Mark of Eviction is returned to Dylan's. Dylan then pays 1 for Elephant Grass's cumulative upkeep and casts Overburden, again with the crazy cards. He then passes the turn.
Tristan plays Command Tower and then casts Grave Pact. Apologies for the camera. That's better. He then uses his remaining mana to cast Ashnod's Altar, and passes to Martin.
I start my turn by recasting Sidisi, losing another life to Llanowar Wastes. I return a Swamp to my hand as the result of Overburden, and mill 3 cards. I once again fail to mill a creature, leading me to believe that Alex may have taken them all out of my deck when I wasn't looking. I Soul Bond my Navigator to Sidisi once more, play a Swamp, and then pass the turn.
In my turn, I sacrifice Reclamation Sage to Birthing Pod, putting Gonti, Lord of Luxury, onto the battlefield. I return a Swamp to my hand, and then target Tristan with Gonti's ability. I steal one of the top 4 cards of his library, play a Swamp, and cast Whip of Erebos. I then discard down to 7 and end my turn.
Dylan pays 2 for Elephant Grass's cumulative upkeep and recasts Mark of Eviction, targeting Deadeye Navigator. He then passes the turn.
For his turn, Tristan plays Grim Backwards. He then casts Jared's Orders, putting Viridian Zealot into his hand and Eternal Witness into his graveyard. He casts the Zealot and immediately sacrifices it to destroy Overburden, whilst Overburden's trigger is on the stack. Grave Pact triggers, I sacrifice Satyr Wayfinder, and Martin sacrifices Sidisi. Karmic Justice then triggers and Dylan destroys Tristan's Ashnod's Altar. After all that, Tristan returns Grim Backwards to his hand and passes to Martin.
I begin my turn by playing a Swamp. Still no painless green sources. I then lose yet another life to Llanowar Wastes and cast Vulturous Zombie, which would have been super great to have in play last turn. I move to combat and attack Dylan with my Navigator, paying the 2 required for Elephant Grass. Dylan takes 5 damage and I move to my end step. Alex responds by casting Thought Scour, targeting himself. What is this, modern? I put 3 counters on my zombie thanks to Alex's self-milling, and then Alex moves to his turn.
I cast Muldrotha and then play Verdant Catacombs from my graveyard. I lose a life and sacrifice it to put a forest into play, and Martin puts a counter on his zombie. I then recast Satyr Wayfinder from my grave, revealing Viscera Seer, Coiling Oracle, Watery Grave, and Ramanap Excavator. I put the land to my hand, and Martin puts 3 more counters on Vulturous Zombie. Moving to combat, I attack Tristan with Gonti, dealing him 2 damage. I then discard down to 7 and pass to Dylan.
In Dylan's upkeep, I return Deadeye Navigator to my hand and he returns Mark of Eviction to his. He then pays 3 for Elephant Grass's cumulative upkeep and plays Opulent Palace. Dylan then casts Mark of Eviction for the 3rd time, this time attaching it to Muldrotha once more, and ends his turn.
Tristan replays Grim Backwards, and then casts Panharmonicon. He then passes to Martin, leaving 4 mana untapped.
I once again fail to draw a source of green mana that doesn't hurt me, and cast Forbidden Alchemy. I put one of the top 4 cards of my library into my hand and the rest into my graveyard. Then cast Centaur Vinecrasher. I lose another life to Llanowar Wastes and put 15 counters on my Centaur. Milling nothing but lands finally pays off. Moving to combat, I attack Tristan with my 10/10 Vulturous Zombie and he responds by putrefying it. RIP Plant Zombie. I then pass to Alex.
I start my turn by playing Tectonic Edge, ensuring that Martin leaves me alone by threatening to destroy his only source of green mana. I then recast Reclamation Sage from my graveyard, destroying Grave Pact. Next, I cast Baleful Strix from my graveyard as my artifact for turn, and draw a card. Not quite finished, I cast Song of Freyalise from my graveyard, and then move to combat. I attack Tristan for 6 with Muldrotha, gaining 6 life as a result of my whip. I then discard down to 7 and end my turn.
In his upkeep, Dylan decides that Elephant Grass is becoming too expensive to keep around and sacrifices it. Mark of Eviction then returns to his hand and Muldrotha returns to Alex's. Dylan then casts Cage of Hands, targeting my Centaur. Next he casts Propaganda, rebuilding his Pillar Fort. With no mana left, Dylan passes to Tristan.
Tristan begins his turn by recasting his commander, and then casts Evolutionary Leap. He goes to his end step and returns Eternal Witness to his hand before passing the turn.
I begin my turn by playing Opulent Palace. Finally, painless green mana. I then cast Master Biomancer, losing a life to Llanowar Wastes. Unable to attack with my Vinecrasher, I pass to Alex.
In my upkeep, I put another lore counter on my Saga. I then play Polluted Delta, pay 1 life and sacrifice it to put an island into play. Next, I pay 2 life and sacrifice Gonti to Birthing Pod. I put Sidisi Undead Vizier onto the battlefield, and sacrifice Satya Wayfinder to her exploit trigger to tutor for a card. I then recast my commander and cast Coiling Oracle from my graveyard. Ashnod's Altar is revealed as the top card of my library, and I put it into my hand. Moving to my end step, I discard down to 7 and end my turn.
Dylan plays Command Tower, and then casts Mark of Eviction targeting Muldrotha. Deja vu. He then casts Search for Azcanta, followed by Hundun of Knight's Reach. With nothing more to do, Dylan then passes the turn.
For his turn, Tristan plays Terramorphic Expanse. He then casts Eternal Witness, getting 2 triggers from her Enter the Battlefield ability thanks to Panharmonicon. Value. Tristan puts Grave Pact and Awakening Zone into his hand and then casts the latter. He activates Evolutionary Leap, sacrificing Eternal Witness and gaining an experience counter. He puts Fleshbag Marauder into his hand and then passes the turn. In his end step, Tristan returns Eternal Witness to his hand with Meren's ability, and Martin returns Drownyard Temple from his graveyard to the battlefield before moving to his turn.
I begin my turn by recasting Sidisi. Sidisi enters with 2+1/+1 counters on her thanks to Master Biomancer, and I mill 3 cards. I finally mill a creature, putting 2 zombies into play due to parallel lives, both of which enter with 2+1/+1 counters. Boom! Happy with my turn, I pass to Alex.
I put a 3rd lore counter on Song of Freyalise after my draw, sacrifice it, and put a +1/+1 counter on each of my creatures. Next, I play Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth. Because there's no such thing as having too many swamps really, I cast Ashnod's Altar and then sacrifice all of my creatures other than Muldrotha to produce 8 mana. I then cast Birds of Paradise, immediately sacrificing it to the altar for a further 2 mana. I sacrifice Muldrotha in the same way, floating 2 more mana, and then tap out to cast Torment of Hailfire, where X is 17. Dylan sacrifices all of his non-land permanents, discards his only card in hand, and takes 33 damage. Tristan sacrifices Evolutionary Leap, discards 7 cards and takes 27 damage. And finally Martin discards 4 cards, sacrifices his 2 zombies and takes 33 damage. With no mana, no creatures and a huge target on my head, I end my turn.
Dylan starts his turn by playing Dwar Isle Refuge, gaining a life. He then casts both of his commanders, Thrasios Triton Hero and Ravos Soul Tender. With no cards in hand and no mana available, Dylan passes the turn.
Awakening Zone triggers in Tristan's upkeep, creating a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn. Tristan then plays Llanowar Wastes and moves to combat. He attacks me with Meren, dealing me 3 damage, and then goes to his second main phase. Tristan sacrifices his spawn to float a colorless mana, and in doing so gains an experience counter. Moving to his end step, he returns Viridian Zealot to the battlefield with Meren, and passes to Martin.
I start my turn by playing Extract from Darkness, causing everybody to mill 2 cards. I mill a creature and get 2 zombies to replace the ones that I sacrificed earlier. I decide to put Alex's Eternal Witness into play from his graveyard in order to stop him from using it to get back Torment of Hailfire next turn. I use the Witness's Enter the Battlefield trigger to put Extract from Darkness back into my hand, and then flashback Gnaw to the Bone. I gain 18 life, restoring my life total to a less dangerous figure. Moving to combat, I attack Alex with Sidisi, Centaur Vinecrasher and Master Biomancer. Sidisi triggers and I mill 3 cards, one of which is a creature. I create 2 more zombies and put 2 +1/+1 counters on each of them. Having no creatures to block with, Alex takes the 23 damage. I then end my turn.
In my turn, I cast Sidisi Undead Vizier that I stole from Tristan's deck with Gonti, sacrificing her to her own exploit effect. I search my library for a card and put it into my hand, and then cast Control Magic, targeting Martin's commander. I immediately sacrifice Sidisi to Birthing Pod, putting Verdurous Gearhulk into play, and put 4 +1/+1 counters on it. I then pass to Dylan.
Dylan begins his turn by casting Baleful Strix, drawing a card. He then activates Thrasios' ability, scrying the top card of his library to the bottom and revealing a swamp in its place. He puts the land onto the battlefield and then casts Rhystic Study. Moving to combat, Dylan attacks Tristan with Ravos and Tristan responds by sacrificing Viridian Zealot to destroy Rhystic Study before Dylan can get any value from it. Tristan's life total then hits 0 and Dylan ends his turn.
Martin starts his turn by playing a Swamp. He then moves to combat, attacking me with everything except Master Biomancer, knocking me out of the game. In his second main phase, Martin casts Extract from Darkness, causing himself and Dylan to mill 2 cards. He then puts Diagraph Captain into play from his graveyard and casts Tasigur the Golden Fang before passing the turn.
For his turn, Dylan casts Daxos the Returned. He then casts Thassa, God of the Sea, gaining an experience counter, and uses Daxos' ability to make a 3/3 spirit. Dylan then passes to me.
Martin wastes no time in his turn, moving straight to combat. He turns his board sideways, annihilating Dylan and winning the game.
Well, that's it for another episode. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like it. You can also follow us on Twitter @4Commander or support us on Patreon. We'll see you next time.